Top of the workout, we're going to start with a bent knee glute lift with our feet elevated. So we're making sure that we can either have shoes on or off, but they're on the bench or a chair, anything that you have at home. You're keeping your upper back nice and solid on the ground. You're pulling your abdomen in as you squeeze your glutes up. You could add resistance if you want, such as dumbbells. If so, you want to bring your hips back a little bit. So they're definitely at hips and knees at a 90-degree, and you're squeezing up through the glutes, making sure you have a nice strong back. You're not wanting to arch your back on this one. So set of 12 to 15 repetitions. You can build increasing repetition or adding weight, but you're going to hold into a glute lift using the bottom of your foot again on the bench or this chair, and you're just going to do a hip flexion and extension. So you'll notice that I'm staying nice and strong through the core, through the shoulders, head is relaxed, chin is tucked, and we're doing flexion and extension, trying to keep the knee as straight as I can. So keeping that quad nice and tight, keeping the ankle at neutral, and not allowing the hips to move at all. So just increasing that stability and overall strength of the hip. And then we're doing the other side through flexion and extension. So definitely slow on the way down. So you're stopping and using those glutes as brakes so that you're not dropping that hip as you drop that leg. You're definitely going to feel the stabilizing leg and the contents of the core kicking in here, making sure you're breathing and maintaining that full breath through each repetition and movement. Then we're going to switch and go back into the isometric glute lift. That means not moving, and we're going to do nice circles. Notice that my circles are only as big as range of motion that I have in that hip joint. So I'm keeping the leg straight, I'm drawing the circle with my toe, keeping my ankle somewhat relaxed, and then I'm reversing the circle back for another 5 repetitions. So depending on where your hips are for mobility, that's going to determine the size of your circle. Again, I'm watching and making sure my hips aren't dropping or rotating, so I'm protecting that SI joint. You're going to do 5 circles each way. On each side, maintaining that control, definitely working through the stability of the core, getting the full breath, being allowed to do that belly breath while you still hold your core tight. Letting everything relax as you come down and moving on to a modified plank next. So getting in a little bit of a hip flexor stretch here, just roll it out, keep the tailbone nice and long as you do. Coming into a modified plank to start. So you don't want your elbow to be out, you want it to be directly underneath your body. Your chin is tucked, your earlobes are between your shoulder blades, your hips are square. Keeping your quads on top of one another, you're drawing the hip down and then pulling up, bringing that rib and hip on that bottom together, right? So you're making sure that you're using the obliques through the QL, keeping your hips nice and square. You can make it a little bit harder by doing both legs down. Just make sure you have that offset foot stance for a little bit more stability. Definitely pressing through the lats. I can't stress enough how important it is to keep that elbow below the shoulder. You don't want it to be above or else it presses on the shoulder joint. You want it to be below so that when you come up, your body straightens out, and then you make the adjustments you need to. Hips are nice and square, chin is gently tucked, finding that neutral in your spine so there's no pulling on any muscle. Okay, might feel weird, but you're making sure that you're using that side that's towards the ground and you're squeezing up or you're pressing through that elbow, so you're drawing the weight, the pressure into those lat muscles. Again, offside foot stance. So we're doing either your modified version of your knee, and notice that your chin starts coming out, so you want to make sure that you keep that chin nice and tucked. Moving into our side lying glute series, we're going to just stay laying on our side. We're going to grab a block to keep our head nice and neutral, our hips and shoulders stacked. Our feet are going to be directly in line with our tailbone as we start our clamshell. So we're going to be doing both sides 2 to 3 times, keeping the inside of the feet together as you slowly externally rotate and abduct that leg, the femur at the hip, out to the side, keeping those hips stacked. Keep the breath in. Then we're going to go into an inverted, okay, so working a little bit more Keep those legs up. Okay, that's going to work your internal rotators on the bottom leg, and finish off kind of with your up hip flexors and TFL on the bottom. So I'm just kind of playing around with my legs, showing you that you definitely want to have the legs in the air, but notice that my hips stay stacked and I'm not letting my hip come up into my side. So I'm gently just pushing my hands on the top of my hip to make sure it stays down, keeping the abdominals in. So you're in, you're holding that hammock or that pelvic floor in about 30%. And in another video, I'll talk a little bit more about the pelvic floor and the hammock and how it all ties into the rest of your exercises. Your leg is going to be nice and straight. You can keep your foot at neutral, but you're keeping your knee straight. And you want to stay balanced here, so you can use your hand on the floor. You want to keep your head and shoulders somewhat relaxed, and you're not engaging too much of those muscles other than just to stabilize and stay side lying. Really think about drawing a big enough circle, but allowing those hips to stay relatively neutral and not letting your knee do the work. You want to keep that leg nice and straight. So circles backwards. Now we're going to come and bring that leg up. Notice that the hip likes to hike and roll up. We're going to make sure that hip stays rolled down. So you can only lift the leg as high as you can. Again, keep those hips stacked and keep the abdominals in. I'm going to slightly internally rotate my big toe, so my knee is pointing down just a little bit, just to grab the outer edge of my IT band and into my vastus medialis or vastus lateralis, so the outer quad muscle. Then I'm going to bring this leg into a stretch, keep the foot on the floor, and just do a little pulse. Notice my bottom leg is straight. Okay, I'm doing a reset for the core and the hips at this point. So just a small little pulse, maybe 30 repetitions, or until you start feeling something fatigue. Be mindful of your lower back and your hip on these exercises. Okay, just wiggle your legs out, making sure you feel nice and loose and we're not carrying any residual tension into the next exercise. So moving on to the other side, we're going to do the exact same thing over. I'm not particularly picky about the order of operations that you do the exercises in, but you want to make sure that that form is always nice and controlled. So earlobes are in line, shoulders are in line, abs are in, feet in line with the back of the spine. Keeping the inside of the feet together as we squeeze up. We really want to squeeze up at the top, but allowing those hips to stay nice and solid. Control that movement with your breath. So as you breathe out, you're pulling the contents of that lower pelvic floor in and allowing it to somewhat relax as you're breathing in at the end of the exercise. So into that inversion again, coming and just working a little bit more of the top of the hip. It's an area that sometimes is very tight on most people, but really weak. So we just want to kind of find that happy balance between right and left side and intrinsic and extrinsic muscles. So bringing it into the sideline hip, make sure that hip doesn't roll up again. Straight leg, slightly inverted toe, and I mean slight. You can't even really tell I'm doing it. Especially if it means that that hip is going to roll. So just even thinking about that toe turning in a little bit will be enough to grab that outer part of the quad and into the glute med at this point. Big circles back, keep those legs nice and straight, making sure you're keeping those hips stacked, noticing any tension. Just make sure that you're not feeling any other tension in the rest of the body. Bringing it to the front again. You can hold the ankle, you don't have to, but I just feel like it works a little bit better for myself. And squeezing up with that inner thigh, breathing it out, pulling that core in, keeping those shoulders stacked again, and just making sure that no other tension in the body is creeping in at this point. This is just a really good hip reset. You'll notice that there might be some imbalances. One side was harder, one side was easier, but that's okay. The more we do this, the more our body will start to adapt. We're going to superset our bent over rows and our wall sit. So we're going to use the wall to kind of position our butt against it so that we know that our sit bones are staying nice and even. It's kind of like, mimicking the same thing that putting a block between our legs to hold our SI joints nice and even would do. But we're going to make sure you can either hold your bum off the wall a little bit or have it gently touching. But you're going to pull your elbows and shoulder blades back and down towards the wall, keeping a slight bend in the knees, but remembering we're hinged over, so our belly button should be in line with the middle of our ankle. We're going to do the 12 repetitions of rows and then straight into our wall sit, making sure that we're not pressing our lower back into the wall, but we're keeping a neutral spine. So we're having our sacrum or our tailbone and our shoulder blades pulled back and down, and we're pulling in our abdominals here, but mostly pulling in the pelvic floor, keeping the knees directly over top of the second and third toe, and keeping a nice controlled breath, earlobes between shoulder blades. And we're hoping to hold this for about 30 seconds. Coming up and repeating that 3 more times. You're going to do a hold, contract, relax stretch for the quadriceps. So just using the wall to gauge where your hips, your knees, and your shoelaces should be. You're kicking your foot into your hand and then pulling the heel back to the glute. Kicking it back into your hand again and then back to the glute. And just getting that hip to stay nice and even. We're making sure we're not letting the hip fall or drop in any way, shape, or form. And we're just kicking that foot into our hand and then letting it relax and pulling it gently back so our knee is just ever so slightly behind the stabilizing one. We want to try and do this stretch while maintaining a nice neutral spine in the upper body, using the wall or something to hold on to for a little bit of stability and balance. And we're keeping everything, our pelvic floor and our hammock, pulled up and in while we do our deep breathing through our abdominals. 30 seconds to a minute on each side per stretch. Moving on to our foam roller, keeping our spine nice and in line. So you're going to find your tailbone, your shoulder blades are just going to melt over top, and we're going to get some nice mobility through our shoulders, keeping our chin neutral and tucked. Keeping our knees over top of the middle and second toe, and we're pressing over top of the chest, directing with our thumb and index over top of the sternum, and then nice and slow on the way down as we're coming through our lats and our rear delt as we absorb the weight through our chest. So we're getting a nice stretch through the chest and in through the front of the shoulders. Moving on to our tricep, we're going to let the weight slide to the back of the hand. We're going to line up our elbow with our eyebrow, and we're going to press up through. So depending on your range of motion, you might go all the way down to the ground on this one, depending on the size of foam roller you have. But just listen to your body and allow those shoulder blades to work, stabilizing you to maintain that posture, and only go down as far as you feel a nice, significant stretch through the back of the tricep. Breathing out, coming up to a pretty much full extension of the tricep. You might not lock out the elbow, but you're going to get a pretty full extension of the tricep itself. So you'll feel the tricep kicking in. Let those shoulders just open up and melt over top after you're done for a couple nice big deep breaths. We're going to show you the tricep press after we just stretch out the neck. You're bringing your chin to your shoulder, and then switching sides, chin to opposite shoulder, taking a big deep breath with every single side, and just letting that fascia melt over top of the foam roller. Stretch out the shoulders. You can give a pull to each side. And I'm just going to quickly show you the angle of the chest press and the tricep again, just in case you kind of were confused to where everything was positioned. Just looking at the knees, the head, the chin is tucked. And you're getting that full extension of the elbow, but you're not moving the shoulders from where they are. Because if you straightened out the elbows anymore, the shoulders would move. And we want to keep the shoulders and the elbows directly in line with either the eyebrows or the nose, wherever your mobility is in your shoulders, to get that stretch through the tricep into the lats. The press, just showing you from a different angle, coming up. I over-exaggerate the light grip because I want you to press up through the thumb and the index and absorb the weight down with that elbow, the rear delt, and the lats. Breathing out on the way up. Pressing through the chest. Awesome. And doing 3 sets of 12 to 15 repetitions here as well.